painting that I like or the art that I like usually has like a focal point somewhere, like you want to direct the climber or the viewer's attention. I think that applies to like shaping when it's like more the artistic, like sculptural stuff where it's like, don't really necessarily want to just have this shape just littered in all this high frequency detail. It's usually like, I really want to like focus in on this pock mark that I think is really cool that like goes out to some cracks and kind of fades, and leaves. And similar, like the way I like to try to set routes, like there's a crux or like, a build up to this moment, kind of similar.
Welcome to the Testpiece podcast. This podcast is about all things high-level climbing. How to go from good to great. I'm your host, Joshua Horsley. I've been climbing for over 30 years. We recently updated our Patreon, and now you get exclusive content from the guests that you love. You get your episodes before everyone else, and they're ad-free. Try it out now at patreon.com/testpiece with a free 7-day trial. Okay, let's start the show. Daniel Yagmin Jr., welcome to the podcast. I'm just going to call you Dan, but we were talking before. I thought your full name was very cool, dude.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Super, super, super psyched.
Well, Dan, the young guns from the Northeast are always telling me about you and your board, especially my Good Temps co-host, Austin Hoyt, and my good old friend, Bryce Viola. They said, don't sleep on the Decoy board. Don't sleep on Decoy holds. And they are both route setters and board connoisseurs. And although I have yet to have a chance to climb on the Decoy board, I trust those guys' opinions more than most. So, Dan, psyched to have you come on today.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate those guys in so many ways. I love those guys so much. Like they've done so much to help things out with Decoy and just as friends, and just the fact that they even include me on things at times. Just really appreciate it and having them around.
It's a good little scene out there you guys gotten. There's always this joke, or we made this joke about the Northeast, not getting a lot of attention or love, but somehow it's just in the media. It's that whole crew. And those two guys I just mentioned are just one of a few young guns. And so it seems like you got a close knit community that is churning out some strong, not just strong, good guys for the community.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's been there, for a long time. That kind of, like you said, close knit. Everybody, I feel like, especially in the early days too, just kind of, there's always this sort of network. Like we kind of joke around. It's like sort of this network for my friends, Aaron's place all the way up in, northern Vermont down to like kind of my place and all the boulders in between and the different people along them, and the way like there's sort of been that community and connection that's lasted for the last, couple decades and continues to grow and continues to sort of like be a thing. It's kind of cool to see it.
There is some kind of thing about climbing where these little areas build a group and a style. Like the Southeast had a certain flavor and created certain climbers that we all know and love. Colorado has a scene for sure. I gotta say California, or like especially, Yosemite and Bishop have a scene, but I feel like I'm less aware of it because I'm there. I could just name every single climbing place in the world. But I really like that. Like I really like that these little pockets arise organically. And it also kind of shows that who you're with and like the styles that your friends push you towards, like lead to these branches of styles. And right now everyone's talking about how the Northeast is just full of absolute monsters when it comes to finger strength and boards, to be honest. So not a question there, just kind of like fascinating how that works out.
Yeah, certainly, man. And like how that's, of course, like influenced by like the rock and the rock types, the style of the climbing in those areas, and how you see that carry through in the climbers that like kind of come out of the different regions and the different strengths they have. It's always kind of fascinating to see.
Dan, you've been climbing a long time. You've been climbing quite a while. You've been route setting a long time. You've been shaping holds for a long time, over a decade. You've done FAs and tons of different disciplines. I know you've even helped open at least one gym, and now you're also the founder and owner of Decoy, which, like I said, makes a great standardized climbing board and climbing holds. And actually, I just wanted to ask you, where did the name Decoy come from? Like, Decoy is a interesting name.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's something that was kind of kicked around for a bit with a friend of mine who kind of helped me get things going in the very beginning. Of course, like anything in the start, you're throwing around all sorts of different ideas. And I kind of knew from an early point that I was super like interested in like outdoor inspiration, things that were inspired by nature. I had an illustration and sculpture background. So I was like really, for me from the start, I was really interested in like the sculptural aspects and like kind of replicating, outdoor styles and like taking that and bringing that to the hold shaping into the foam shaping. So the thought there was like, Decoy, it's like not what it seems, like this thing that represents this other thing, sort of, so to speak.
So that makes perfect sense. And when I heard the word Decoy, I didn't think of that whatsoever. I didn't think of anything, to be honest. I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool name, stands out. And then I was talking to Bryce and Austin, and they were like, one of the things about Dan's shaping is that there's an aesthetic to it that has all these lines and textures, and it's an aesthetic that's different than this kind of comp, really sheer, flat, basic idea. And I was like, oh, maybe Decoy is about replicating the outdoors. So now it's like obvious, but yeah, took me a moment.
I'd rather hear like you weren't sure at all than like what comment is like, oh, decoy duck. You're just like, yeah, no, there's no, or what most people usually come up with. So.
Okay, Dan, that was actually what I thought, because I grew up in like a farm with like a hunting background. I was like, oh yeah, my grandpa had these beautiful decoy mallards and stuff. So I'm sorry, that was actually, but that's not a bad association either, man.
No, that's kind of cool too. Cause yeah, now that you say that, like when you think about the kind of craft that goes into those and like when you think about, I guess it's like, again, like many things like climbing holds, we often don't think about how do these things come into the world? People just assume that they just sort of appear. But the fact that there is somebody hand carving and hand painting, at least probably the traditional decoy ducks, is super cool.
They are works of art and really valuable and beautiful, actually. So, okay, did not see that coming. It's a very big tangent. Dan, so sounds like you are steeped in the outdoors as well, and you bring that into your hold setting. And so you've been climbing a long time, but then there's also route setting and hold making and hold shaping. I'm just kind of curious about like your origin story or that thread that led you to making Decoy, because it seems like there's a strong connection to outdoors. And you also mentioned that there's a art background and you say sculpture. Yeah, sculpture. I've never thought of hold shaping using the term sculpture, but I see that connection too.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, the origin story, obviously goes deep. I know we don't want to get into like some full on, life story tale, but I mean, yeah, I think simply like when you look at those main elements, right? Like you have like rock climbing as one, art, sculpture as another, and then route setting as another. I feel like before I got into shaping, I feel like those three things were like so much, I'd say like really define a lot of, I guess, my identity in a lot of ways. So I think shaping just sort of happened naturally, right? It's sort of a culmination of those three main things kind of coming together. I think like it made sense that eventually happened. The path obviously was a lot more convoluted and involved.
So when did you first start climbing, and when did that turn into route setting? I feel like that's a very reasonable, predictable path. Actually, is like, I like climbing. Oh, route setting is cool. Like I'm going to pick up a drill. And then, you can really feel that routes are heavily dictated by the holds that are available to you. And so shaping is, a clear growth out of that as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started climbing. First time climbing was like, fifth grade. I wouldn't say that's like when I started climbing. It's the first time I experienced it through like a youth services program that we had at my elementary school. I'd say I'd actually started climbing in like 1995 or six through another school program that was led by this guy, Tom McLaughlin, who was, just a youth services kind of guy that led these climbing trips to local crags in and around Connecticut. And I was lucky enough to kind of jump along on some of those. Tom was like an avid trad climber, taught us how to build anchors, took us to all the different crags. So that sort of started things. I kind of all of a sudden like it opened this universe of like, wow, there's all these little crags and these like little outdoor areas in my state that are super close by and accessible to me. And that just kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, it just felt endless, like the adventures you could go and have in these little spots. Not long after, I started going to Prime Climb, which was our local rock climbing gym. And not soon after going to the gym, hanging out in the gym, did I start route setting.
So I feel like Prime Climb must have been one of the earliest gyms then, because that's right around when I started climbing, was the early and mid 90s. And there just wasn't that many gyms. And it's cool to hear you got your start trad climbing outdoors. I don't know, or and when I say trad climbing, it's probably like some guy putting up a top rope, slinging a tree or something and then hip laying you. Or maybe did you have a Swami belt?
No, we had harnesses for sure.
Gosh. Amazing technology.
It was, not soon after, as soon as I saw, like he showed, like, here's how you set up the top rope, like instantly I'm like out buying cams and just kind of just going for it. So it was definitely trad climbing for me was the start of it.
When did bouldering and route setting enter the equation? Had that's not necessarily like a direct link. Trad climbing, you could still be trad climbing. It still exists, Dan.
Yeah, no, I still do. Lately, that's been the psych. But trad climbing is that what led to the bouldering development, at least in Connecticut, because I started going to this place, Bradley Mountain. And I started going to Bradley Mountain just to go climb like on the little crags that were scattered about, that were in some of the old guidebooks. They're super short, like little 40-foot basalt crags that were kind of littered with little cracks and face climbs. And that was sort of the interest. And at that time, like that's when I was going to Prime Climb, and Prime Climb had the one bouldering wall, and like there were some other more experienced climbers there that were like way into bouldering. Like I didn't get it. I was like, I just wanted to go rope climbing. It's like that's all I really knew climbing to be at the time. But as I started to hang out with these other guys, like Phil Shaw, like he was already comp climbing. His father lived out in the Bay, so like he had been out in the Bay Area, exposed to people who had been out in Yosemite and had more roots in the early culture of climbing. And so Phil kind of had this like interest in bouldering. And so we hung out and we bouldered a lot at Prime Climb on like the 45-degree wall. So I started to get kind of psyched on that discipline of climbing. And then as I was out at Bradley, just to go out and top rope and climb on little crags, I started to like poke around and be like, well, like, I know it sounds stupid or naive, but I was like, look at all these boulders. This has to be bouldering, right? Like, and so got kind of the guys from the gym that I was climbing with at the time to come out and kind of like check it out. And, of course, we started developing that and getting psyched on that. And that sort of started to blossom.
Phil Shaw, good shout out. Yeah, one of the things that I think it was Bryce, maybe it was Austin. No, yeah, Austin wanted to know about the story behind Double Down. That is supposed to be a great V13 right next to another classic, Roses and Blue Jays. I think they both wanted to hear a little more Northeastern lore, and that was quite a boulder for them. So yeah, what's the story behind that, FA?
Well, Double Down's located on the Speed Boulder, which I'd say is up there, one of the single best boulders we have in New England, and one of my favorite boulders I've ever climbed on anywhere. It's just like the super perfect piece of gneiss. So Double Down's on that. It kind of tackles like this like one, hard to say what angle, maybe it's 60 degrees or whatever. But
wow, 60. Jeez.
Maybe it's hard to say because it sits on a hillside, and it's like I've never actually, like, even if you put an angleometer to it, it's like, I don't know, you're on a different plane, and would it be accurate? I have no idea how that works. But so the story there, I mean, I started climbing in Great Barrington. We were doing that Bradley development and kind of started to hear about Great Barrington bouldering. The main way you'd hear about other bouldering areas at that time was through the New England Bouldering website, which was just like a message board and like a photo gallery at the time, which was like huge back in the early mid 90s. It's kind of where everybody went to kind of share their newest scents and just chat with one another through the message board. So I kind of heard about Great Barrington and started to go and check it out because, it was only about an hour away from where I was living at the time. And of course, upon, climbing there, I was lucky enough to meet Chris Fowler and Dan Mahoney, who were some of the earlier developers in that area. And Chris Fowler had established what he called Castellette, which was like the stand start to what became Double Down. And it's sort of like this heinous, like 3-finger slot mono thing that you kind of have to either like campus or do this weird toe hook to hit this sloping jug. And I got to be friendly with Chris and climbed with him and Dan a bit through that season. And Chris showed me kind of like, here's this project that I'd been trying, I had envisioned. He said if he did it, he'd like to call it Double Down, and like kind of showed me where he thought it would start. And so I was just like, I got super psyched because, at that time, the Speed Boulder, it had the Speed Traverse, Big Love, Castellette, and some couple others, but like Something from Nothing wasn't yet a boulder problem. Roses wasn't yet a boulder problem. Double Down wasn't. So just there's this kind of clean slate, clean canvas at the time. So Chris showed me that, and I started working it whatever year it was, getting psyched on it. Started to get close. I think right around that time, there were some other visiting like super strong climbers that were like psyched to do it. Like luckily, I got to do it, and they all did it after.
That was Austin's specific question was, who did Dan burn off on his send of that, which I thought was classic.
I don't think it was any burning off. I think it was more like something I had spent multiple sessions versus like something that people did, really fast. So either way, super stoked to like be able to have just, a part in that Speed Boulder history. It's like a little unfortunate because I feel like that problem often gets kind of trash talk these days because like it turns out like people started this different way with like some kind of ring lock that's kind of different than the original way that makes it easier. So it's sort of controversial. It's like, what is the actual problem? So it got a little muddied. A lot of people I've seen that repeat it still do it sort of like the original way, starting in the slots and don't do the fingered lock.
I thought you were going to say it gets overshadowed because there's people in today's era that do things like campus roses and blue jays and just generally have a level that just makes it all look easy. Shout out Ben Kim. What I meant to do before I brought up this hard bouldering is I meant to bring up that classic trad climbing evolution of that area and connect it to bouldering, because you were telling me that there's a 5.8 there that got put up in the 1930s, and that new project by Adam Shahar, which I did a segment with Adam recently, that he thinks may be one of the hardest boulders, well, in America, or has one of the hardest moves. And just that you thought it was cool how it was like right next to each other. And so I'm sorry, I took it straight to hard bouldering, but I meant to somehow link, the era of hard trad climbing. 5.8 was cutting edge at one point. It truly was.
Yeah, no. I think it's a little controversial whether or not it was like the first one in the country, but it's believed to be. I think it was Fritz Wiesner. I think it was 1935, in boots and minimal gear, put up this thing. It's called Vector, and it's like this kind of flaring groove through this bulge. I'm sure it would be 5'10" in most areas. I haven't done it in a bit, but last time I remember doing it, it's just hard. You're like, wow, like someone did this in the 30s, like hats off. And then it's pretty cool to see sort of the evolution to what's happening today, because that project that sits down below, it's just amazing.
How do they protect stuff back in the 1930s, and how do they belay? Like, I'm just trying to like envision, like, okay, you got boots. I understand just heavy hiking boots. I understand how climbing works. But like they have pitons, but you can't hammer them in really. Actually, you can hammer them in on lead. I don't know how that stuff works. I have no knowledge of 1930s protection. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm assuming it was very minimal. yeah, maybe either like knots jammed in the cracks, pitons, maybe stuff that they like legitimate like nuts, like metal, machine nuts on some kind of hemp rope or something like that. But to my knowledge, that's it. And just basically free soloing, with some rabbly gear.
Yeah, it's a shot of whiskey and a big dose of bravery, and some bragging rights to your buddies afterwards when you didn't die. And I'll never do that one again. Yeah, that's the protection. Just God.
Yeah, that crazy to think. Like to this day, I mean, that climb, it's not easy. It's pretty impressive that was happening back then.
Yeah, yeah. I love the history of climbing. I love seeing how you can just be in love with trad climbing, sport climbing, bouldering, board climbing, indoor climbing, all of the above. And it's just fun to try to like kind of see how they arise out of each other. It's like, this is literally a boulder that probably fell off of that cliff or something. It's like they're all connected. Yeah. And then how we all participate in it over, like 100 years later. It's just interesting. It always makes me wonder, like, what's going to happen in 100 years from now? Like, what are people going to be psyched on then?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, because when you look at that evolution from Vector to the Ragged Mountain Project, I mean, it's just, leaps apart. Like, can we go, will that progression in 100 years be a similar leap, or will it be much smaller? It's like, it seems like it can't be a similar leap, just like how could it be? But at the same time, it'd be interesting to know.
I don't know, man. Things have definitely changed a lot in the last 3 to 5 years. There's definitely a psych and a change in just what people are seeking out. So I feel like it's easy to look into the future and think it's going to be just like it is today. And that's just so impossible to think how it will be different. But that's why I like staying in climbing. Like, it's changed a lot over the, 30 years we've been doing it. And
absolutely.
I'm just excited that we still get to be a part of it and see what's coming next. So
absolutely.
Okay, I don't know where this was in your climbing life, but I know from talking to Julian at GP81 that you were part of GP81 in the early days. When did GP81 come into your story?
Well, yeah, let's see. GP81 came into the story after I had moved to New York City to take a job as a head setter for the cliffs of Long Island City and work with my friend Paul Jung. Eventually, I left that. I went to Chicago, worked for BKB for a short bit, kind of crashed and burned in Chicago. This wasn't the place for me. Landed back in Connecticut. Wasn't really sure what to do. Another opportunity came up to kind of go work in the city again. So it's like, give it a shot. Kind of at the time was, I had a lot of friends down there, or have a lot of friends down there, and just was interested in getting back. So I started working at this small gym called Steep Rock on the Upper East Side. Steep Rock was owned by this guy, Mike Cesari, who also helped start Decoy and who also was really the person who helped start GP81. So I was working for Mike at Steep Rock as a route setter. I was shaping some holds at this little space we had around the corner. And then we started talking about what about doing this smaller scale training facility? Could that work here in the city, and so on and so forth. So Mike found the space on Quay Street over by the House of Vans in Greenpoint, and kind of got in that space. And then, I was involved, from that very beginning with the space and the idea. Everybody was psyched. Mike was psyched. I was psyched to kind of try and do everything sort of in-house, including the walls were built by this guy, Niall, from the Hudson Valley, who's a local climber. I was there shaping holds. I was living in my van in the building. So it was, it was an interesting time. I'm not sure if that was a good idea or a bad idea. I think it was an interesting one, and I'm glad we went for it. But,
I think it's funny how we were talking about how a long time ago, of course, everything was done in-house. Of course you built the walls. Of course you did everything because there was no Waltopia, and so everything got done in-house. And then GP81, I did a whole podcast with them, this kind of anti-mega idea, a smaller facility that's not part of the big chains. And I just thought it was kind of interesting that you guys redid that whole concept of kind of from the ground up, building your own walls and then shaping. And did you say you guys even poured holds in house?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. We
Oh,
did
wow.
100%. I mean, so in some ways, yeah, it was crazy, but in other ways, like, I think it was really valuable because, like, a lot of people from the New York climbing scene would come by on a daily, like pitch in and help. Like, hey, what do you need? What do you guys need? You know, like, and I'd be like, I don't know, I need help polishing these hollow backs or sanding this dual tacks or whatever it was, or help building the walls. And so I think that was really good for the gym to kind of build that early community, have that involvement with people from the ground up. You know, not just us who were like directly involved in the gym, but like people that kind of came through the doors at that point to volunteer, I think are still like heavily involved in the space today. So I think that was all really valuable to do it that way. We did 100% from the shaping to the molding to the hollow backing to the pouring. It all wouldn't have been possible without this. There's a guy known as Paco who sort of like a climbing hold manufacturing guru that I met in Colorado who drove all the way out from San Antonio to kind of help. And I mean, Paco is just like, he's just a legend, man, total beast. Well, like without him, there was no way we could have done it.
Okay, you said shaping, molding, hollow back, pouring, not in that order. Dan, I know nothing about that stuff. I'm really excited to dive into it and geek out about hold shaping and all those things that go into it, because as someone who loves climbing, loves route setting, but I never graduated into the hold shaping or manufacturing process behind it. And I don't think many people know about that side of things. And I was talking to, I'm going to say maybe it was Ward Byram. I'm not sure. I was talking to someone about where route setting is going or where comp route setting is going. And they argued that a lot of that depended on hold shaping because they saw it as, you know, they have these tools or holds available to them to set movement, but then in some ways they are restricted by that. And so I think diving all the way down into hold shaping and the technologies that allow certain shapes or don't allow other shapes really is a cool place to have a view into climbing because, yeah, it's foundational. Like without holds, there are no climbs. Maybe we can just start like, imagine that I know nothing about hold shaping because I don't. What's the hold shaping 101? How does it start when you decide like, I want to make some dope holds?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the place you would start would just be some sort of material to sculpt your, you know, your master shape from. And that material can be any number of things, really. I mean, back in the day, it was made out, people did it out of clay and stuff like that, or out of wood, or trying to straight up carved out of rocks. I think in today, most people are using like a high density foam that's often used for prop making. Sculpting something out of some sort of foam is like your general starting point, but that's evolved too in this day and age. Like people are not, I'm sculpting a lot just on my computer in ZBrush. Like, so yeah, it really kind of depends. I'd say traditionally though, high density foam, that would be the starting point, something you'd have to get going. And, you know, that along with, you could do a lot with very basic tools. Like if you have the high density foam, a handsaw, some clay tools, and some sandpaper, I feel like that's really all you would need to really get going.
So you just start with a big piece of foam and whittle it down. And when you say you make a master, so it's like you take that master and then that's your main shape that you then make a mold out of, in which some material can be poured in so that you can replicate that same master off the mold over and over again, right?
Exactly. So, yeah, the foam becomes like your master shape. Whatever type of foam, like if you use a lower density foam, you're going to have a more porosity in your final poured part. If you have a higher density, it's going to be like a finer porosity, depending how you treat that surface. Like if you scratch it with other things, if you use hot, like a low grit sandpaper, high grit sandpaper, that's all going to carry through into the mold, which is going to carry through into the final finished poured plastic part. You had the steps exactly right. It's like you have your foam, you're carving that into whatever shape you want. That's getting taken, covered in silicone, silicone mold is like a negative open face mold. Plastic gets poured into that to make the positive and pulled from the silicone.
And so when you say plastic gets poured into that, that's what holds are made out of. They're plastic. But I feel like that's a very general term. Like, what kind of plastic? How did it used to be done? How is it being done today? Just tell me more about that actual material.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's funny. It's like it's changed a lot and it hasn't changed a lot at the same time. Like, I think I believe Entreprise was the first company to make bolt-on manufactured climbing holds, and I think when they were doing it, at that time, again, like people were using, they were like ceramics. People were using like the stoneware clay that was fired and had a kind of a grit to it. I think people were taking clay, covering it with resin and bolting that to the wall. That stuff sort of evolved into what I think Entreprise started with in the early 80s, which was like more the process I'm talking about, like a foam shape and a silicon mold. But then they were using a polyester resin, which is definitely different than what it evolved to, which now is a polyurethane. The polyester resin, at least in the United States, sort of got cycled out of the production procedures. I think in some places, like in Europe and in the UK, I think they're still using some more of the polyester resin.
Yeah, I've heard pros and cons. I think there are still holds that show up in modern day with polyester. And I remember I was talking to Jared Roth, I think offline, not on the pod I did with him, but he talked about how it wasn't insulating. And so they often felt cool to the touch, even in the summer, compared to polyurethane, which I believe one of the big switches was that it doesn't chip as easily and maybe it's lighter, but he argued it didn't feel as good in hot temps.
Yeah, the feel of the polyester, actually, a lot of people would argue is better. Like exactly that. It's like it has a nice texture to it. It's cooler. A lot of people argue that it keeps its texture longer. It doesn't polish the same way that polyurethane does. But of course, like the limitations are like it's heavier. Like you can remember back to like there's like solid poured polyester holds. Like the early Boss, it was like thing weighed more than I do. It's pretty beast. But yeah, and then the polyester it tends to chip more. So what that does too is it limits your shaping. Like a lot of modern shapes have nice big tapers and things. So like the holds taper into the wall, so it's not this big lump. And with polyester, you're kind of limited to more lumpy sort of shapes because if you taper things out and get thinner on the edges, it's just going to break and crack really quickly. So there's definitely limitations.
Yeah, that was literally my next question is how did the materials like change what is possible in setting? And what's funny is you're talking about like those long tapered features and chipping. And I know like when you're stripping, when you're setting, like nowadays, or like people are super lazy or like you just pull it off, you toss it in a pile, maybe you try not to hit big macros on top of each other. But if you tossed one of those old ones, even like near another hold, somehow it just chipped. And especially back then, hold budgets were much less and your foreman or head of setting would be very angry at you because that probably cost more than your whole salary for that day. So yeah.
No, for sure. For sure.
Don't be gentle with those old holds. Yeah.
No, absolutely, man. I mean, those things would explode. I don't know. I mean, part of me, I'm like, I definitely like the polyester resin or like what Jared was saying, like the feel, the coolness, that sort of aspect. But I think the move towards polyurethane makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So tell me more about what has evolved in hold shaping and what shapes are allowed. Because when I think back, I do think of holds as all being like roughly the same size. Like, they're all about, I don't know, like about the size you need to have a T-nut or, a bolt that goes to the T-nut and have it not explode because it's like too small or not be too large and have this issues of spinning or weight or anything. And so they all were kind of like, I don't know, about the size of a hand or something. But now we see like tons of varieties of shapes. Like, is that always possible? Is that just due to pouring being done differently, allowing for that? And what's the role of hollow backs in all of this?
Yeah, well, it's a good, that kind of ties right in with what your question was. Yeah, I think like some of the size changes we've seen does come down to manufacturing procedures and why we've seen a change in that is because the technology has improved. I think like even just polyurethane technologies have changed and the pouring methods have changed where like back in the day it was probably just like someone in a garage without a climate control with a polyurethane that they didn't really know the properties of too well, mixing it in a bucket, pouring it into a mold. So like, without it being climate controlled, that material is going to kick or cure at a certain pace and like probably faster than you'd want it to be. And if you were like trying to do some massive mold like you have nowadays, like let's say the mold was cold or your room was cold, chances are you're just going to run into a big mess. Like you're going to try to pour that part and you're just going to waste all of that material. Whereas nowadays, in most modern manufacturing plants, like, you have like the molds are heated in a heat chamber. The plastic is heated in a plastic pouring gun. Like it comes out of a tank that's heated to the same temperature of a mold. They know exactly what the properties of the materials are, like how long does it take before it's going to kick. So they know like, okay, like we'll use this material on this giant hole because we know it has a longer cure time and we can actually pour something that size. So that stuff has evolved and improved, I think, from the early times. So I think that definitely has played a role in it. And then, hollow backing is, at least in a traditional polyurethane hold, is what's allowed for like bigger, larger holes. And hollow backing is just, it's basically a plug that sits in the negative space of the silicon mold. It's usually something that's also made out of polyurethane, could be 3D printed as well. And what that does is it just sort of exactly what the name suggests, like it hollow backs like that shape, that form. Instead of having it be a solid piece of polyurethane, you have that plug in there to then, form that hollow crevice with inside the hold. So like keeps it lighter weight, you use less material.
My back appreciates it. It was definitely miserable. I mean, yeah. Also good. I mean, good to use less material. And my hunch is also really good for just shipping costs. I think that's a big part of the expensive holds is they are heavy. They do take up a lot of room. And I know from buying holds for my home walls, wow, shipping is no joke. So just cool to see that innovation. And it makes me wonder about fiberglass. I know I didn't prep you that I was going to ask about fiberglass all, but what do you know about the fiberglass process?
Yeah, I don't know. I have some fiberglass parts that are now being made. It's something I haven't participated in as much as I have the polyurethane production. So I don't know like the ins and outs super well, other than like, I think it's pretty similar where you're going to start with a master form. You're going to make a mold. I'm not sure if it's a silicon mold or not, but then it's inlaid with the fibers. And, for that reason, you can do these massive, massive shapes that are super lightweight and pretty durable. I think that's the main benefit of the fiberglass is being able to like go huge. Like you see some of these new like 360 or Rock City or some of these brands that just have things that are like, 10, 12, like massive. So fiberglass is definitely a great material for that stuff.
I got to tell you, Dan, I don't really like fiberglass holds. I don't know what it is. There's something about grabbing them that is just not fun. Although whenever I feel that, my old friend Moses Potter told me that he liked fiberglass because when you grab it, you don't really get to readjust a bunch. It kind of felt like you take what you get. And he felt like that was, good, maybe outdoor training. And I gotta say, I remember, these things that people told me like Moses or Jared, but then sometimes they listen to these podcasts and then they message me and you're like, you got this all wrong, you idiot. But so just a disclaimer that don't attribute that to Moses or what I said about PE and PU to Jared. That was my interpretation. But yeah, fiberglass is interesting, but man, I don't know. I don't love it. Yeah.
I've been similar. Like I know some people in some gyms, I think a few I've heard about more up in Canada, like that's all they want to use. It's just like strictly fiberglass. And I'm like, skin wise, I'm like, it's like, it just does a number on your skin. But I think like the modern technology, the modern textures that a lot of the companies that are manufacturing them are producing have gotten pretty dialed in. I think like they've gotten a little less aggressive, a little bit finer, but still grippy, where I'm like, they don't totally nuke you as bad. But I'm with you. I mean, especially as it moves to like sort of the topic of like the VTF that I think I've mentioned to you, which is like sort of what's becoming sort of a substitute for fiberglass. I think I really like this technology, but then I think about it in the back of my mind. I'm like, well, what if like VTF totally overtook polyurethane and polyurethane wasn't a thing anymore? How would you feel about that? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how cool I would be with that.
Yeah, it's funny how these trends go. There's all these big macro holds that you talked about, like technology allowed that. But then it bums me out when I go to a gym and it's just all macros and somehow it looks bad. Just like a bunch of tiny holds always look bad. And it was really cool. Back in the day, you would have a couple of macros, like the Boss would be considered a macro. It's a much larger hold is basically what I'm saying. But because they were so expensive and so heavy, what you'd often do is kind of put them up on the wall and then have multiple routes go through them. And there was an aesthetic there. Like these are some big features that we can use and then filled out with little holds. And it's funny how then it's gone the other way. It's like all big. Look at these giant holds. And I don't love it. It doesn't look as good as that mix.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I don't know if I want to say human nature or what it is, but it seems like so often, at least here in the States, it's just kind of like feels a bit like it's always like it's either this or it's that. And it's like, why? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm with you. Like, I love a nice mix. I think, of course, like, I think GP81 does like a great job with their setting where like they have a good density. They've got some big shapes in there. They've got the mid shapes. They've got the small. I'm like, that for me, I see a wall like that and I'm psyched. That gets me stoked to climb.
Totally unbiased.
Yeah, unbiased. And the aesthetic. I mean, that being said, in the right facilities, like some low density, big macros on some cool angles, I mean, it's super fun too. But again, like if you have a facility that allows it, I don't see why not just like a mix of both, like why it has to kind of move in one direction or the other.
Well, let's go back to the hold shaping then. You have a Master of Fine Arts, like we talked a little bit about sculptures and this idea of the art of shaping holds. You've won Hold Shape of the Year twice, I think. And something that I always find interesting about holds is like they have this theme. Like holds typically seem to come in sets. Like it's not that you buy one hold, you buy, I don't know, they'll have a name like of a set of 12 holds and they all have like this similar theme, but they're all different. And so I just want to understand kind of why holds come in sets and how you get inspiration and how that actually translates into the molds or the shapes themselves.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In terms of the sets, I think there's a few different reasons, I would say. I mean, one is definitely like manufacturing processes, right? Like if every 8 hold set had 8 individual SKUs across your entire line, like you're just the number of SKUs you're now dealing with on the manufacturing end is just exponentially more. So there's just exponentially more kind of data and crap to sort of keep organized and to deal with. So I think that's sort of part of it. Yeah, and then the other part is just like, I think when you have an idea and you have a theme in mind, it's like it rapidly grows. Like you kind of come up with this one and you're like, oh, like, yeah, this is cool. And then you're like, yeah, but what if like tweak this face a little and I tweak that face a little? And so like, it just starts to just grow easily that way. And so then like the sets start to make a lot of sense where you're like, and that's changed a bit too. I feel like in the past, I think you used to see more variety in different sets with hold companies, or like within a set, there was like all kinds of different shapes where now it's becoming a bit more uniform. Like your pinch set is like sort of your pinch set, your crimp set, sort of your crimp set. They're not like mixed and matched. And that's, I think, for good reason. I think like lends itself to like, a good thematic setting where you can like follow a theme and follow a feeling. Like following the feeling, I would say leads me into more of the question as to like what inspires or like what goes into some of these shapes. And I think like for a lot of what I try to do is like a lot of like feeling based. It's like, I'm not trying to necessarily like go out and photocopy like a certain type of hold or certain type of shape, right? Like if I wanted to do that, like I can 3D scan something and have it CNC milled. That would be the better way. What I'm more trying to do is like, go to a crag, experience this rock type, and like how do I feel climbing on it? Like, what does it make me feel? What do I think the main attributes of like that style of that place feel like? How can I make some holds that might sort of evoke that similar type of feeling, but on plastic? And that's what really inspires me to like kind of do these like rock inspired, rock driven shapes and sets that I like to try to make.
Quick break while I tell you about today's sponsor. Thank you to all the patrons who help make this show possible. Join them so you can get episodes early before anyone else, and those episodes are ad-free. As a patron, you also get to submit questions for upcoming guests. The answers to those questions are only available to patrons. Follow the link in the show notes to join now. You also get access to a private Discord where you'll find me and other people who want to go from good to great. Okay, back to the pod. That's really interesting because I always think that when you have something like indoor climbing, which is just not outdoor climbing, it's indoor climbing. And so let's acknowledge that and allow it to be its thing. So like like you were saying, we don't have to mimic Midnight Lightning indoors because like we're indoors. It in some ways it's wholly divorced from outdoors, but then of course it's not, like we're climbing on both of them. And so it's always this interesting thing to me where like I'm not always the fan of like when people literally take physical rocks and bolt them indoors. I'm like, I don't know, like if I want to climb on rock, I'll go outside.
Yeah, I mean, I want it to be somewhat interpretive, similar to like the art that I appreciate or art that I like, right? It's like I'm not super interested in like photorealistic artwork where somebody's just like trying to copy a photo or copy a scene like exactly to the T. I'm way more interested in the art that like, sure, it's still grounded in reality. It has semblance of realism, but it's clearly like that person's interpretation you're seeing, like kind of like it's filtered through them and they're sharing part of themselves and they're sharing like part of that experience like on the canvas. And I think for me, like the whole shaping is sort of similar. Like I'm going to like, if I'm climbing in Great Barrington on gneiss, I'm kind of looking at what I'm climbing on and thinking about like, what are the key attributes of this rock style, right? And like, how can I kind of share that in the medium that I have available versus just like, yeah, I need to copy this like one crimp to the T. Just I'm not super interested in that for the same reasons that you mentioned.
Well, one of the things that's different about outdoor holds and indoor holds is that when you're outdoors and, you know, you said something about like a crimp, oftentimes the way to make that crimp work outside is like, you're like, here's this crystal. It's on my pointer. I'm going to get my thumb on this little catch. And that's like the best way to use that hold. And there's no other ways to use it. Where indoors, that's kind of a mistake. Like there's a little more genericness where maybe, you don't have to get the perfect crystal. Like outdoors is very precise, where indoors is a little more open for interpretation when you're climbing.
I mean, that being said, like I agree, like that specific level of like the technical side of things, like if you're on like Yosemite granite, like everything's got to be perfect, but I will say like for me, that's also something like when I'm climbing on a rock type, I do want to try to bring a bit of that nuance into the grips. Like I don't try to be like, I'm going to make this exactly the way like that Yosemite crystal feels or whatever it is. But I do think like a lot of grips have gotten to a point where it's like, I know if I lerp at this thing, it's just kind of this comfy round edge and I'm just going to catch it and it doesn't matter. I do like having some element, at least in more of the rock inspired stuff that I make, that does kind of take in consideration the nuances of different rock types and how that feels to climb on and to navigate through on some level. Like, sure, it's never going to be at the macro level that rock is. And I don't even try and go there. It's like, yeah, no, that's not the point. It's more like that bit of nuance though in the grip still I think is interesting.
It kind of almost sounds like some of your experiences route setting then inform some of your hold shaping. Is there any other connections there of like things that you learned route setting? I don't know if you still pick up drill ever, but how are those related, the hold shaping and the route setting?
I still set a little bit. I will be setting a bit more because it's looking like I'm going to be a partner in a small gym up here in the Berkshires where I'll be kind of taking care of a lot of the setting there. But I also kind of look at setting for me, it's always been commercial setting, right? Like I've set for gyms like Touchstone and the Cliffs, and like on commercial crews where I think we're not setting big flashy comps all the time. It's kind of like we're trying to set good flowy climbs for the customers. And for me as a setter on a commercial level, right, like there's something to be said for like a super directional hold. Like, of course, like a nice directional hold's amazing when I'm trying to force movement and it's simple. Like I know I only have this spot, I can use it. That comes in handy for super specific stuff. But for me, setting on a day to day, I found that's like I like having some holds that have I can flip them, spin them. Like they're still directional. I can still force my movement, but I can kind of get a bit more usage. Like there's like maybe this little foot sculpted into the back that like might be able to be like this technical foot when I get above the hold. And if I spin it this other way, maybe, the hold offers me some other options. Like I think that's cool. I think like that's a bit of why people shy away from like rock textured holds and what they consider old school. Because I think like some of the older rock textured stuff, it was like there's this big grab, there's the intended grabbable surface, but then there's this weird high frequency little crimp over here that everybody ends up using instead of the main grab. Like that I think's bad design. I think most of the modern like rock inspired grips you see out there, that's not so much the case, but I do feel like they offer another layer of complexity for a day-to-day commercial setting where you can just get more mileage out of a single shape.
Yeah, this just goes back to kind of what we were talking about with maybe human nature goes all in on this one thing. And I feel like with dual text or no text, whatever it's called, it was almost like this, look, I only want you to be able to use this as an undercling, and we want you to not be able to use it for anything else. Like I want to like restrict this to a single use. And I was watching the video of you shaping some stuff that was inspired by Castle Rock, which is a sandstone area in the bay that I'll say it's font-esque. And there's all these little like beautiful kind of squiggly lines that you could use for maybe a thumb catch or maybe a catch is the wrong word, a thumb scum, as well as like use for your feet. Like I'm going to pick, especially if I'm in Castle Rock, I'm not going to just smear if I could smear on a ripple that gives me that extra little bit of purchase. And I don't know. It's funny how like I want those nuances. Like I want there to be nuance, not just like a cudgel of this is an undercling and don't you dare think about using it for anything else.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, like you said, doesn't have to be one or the other, right? It's like, there's a lot of in-betweens. And I'm with you. Like I particularly like on that line, like the little ripples and things, like I think going back to talking about nuance where it's just like, I like to try to give some options for like what I think different hand sizes might be. And I think it starts to capture a little bit of what you experience outside. Like, how it can be when you're trying something that's like at your limit. You might sit there and be like, I don't know, is like this little thing or is it that? And you might change your hand positioning, your hand grip multiple times before settling on something. And I think having holds in plastic that have a bit of that in it is, to me, I think is interesting. And it's something I don't want to see go away. Like I think it's cool and has its place.
The transferability or that connection is something that I find can be really difficult for people who have only climbed on plastic or really grown up on plastic. And I'm one of them to a large extent too, is you go outside and you think, okay, this is the hold. I'm going to grab it and then go to the next hold. But that's not how things work. There's a million and one ways that you could, maybe you don't even grab that hold, or maybe you grab like a weird Gasto cling as a bump hold to go to the next one that has no chalk on it. I just remember when my wife started climbing because of me, and then I started taking her outside, and it was very difficult for her to understand that she could make it her own. And it was up to her to decide how to grab a hold. And just because it was chalky in that position didn't mean that was going to work best for her. I like you trying to kind of incept that into gym climbers so they'll maybe have an easier time when they go outside and there's no tape to tell them where to go.
I hope so as well. And I understand a lot of people may never step outside, and that's cool. But even for those folks, at least for me, selfishly or not, or whatever you want to call it, like I like to think I'm kind of giving them a little bit of that outdoor experience, a little bit of that outdoor flavor inside, whether they know it or not. Like they're being influenced by nature, even if it doesn't occur to them whatsoever. And I don't know, that makes me happy on some level. So.
Well, I like that call out that you're like, dude, it's okay if you just grab plastic grips. Like nothing wrong with that. And vice versa too. You can just be outside all the time. It's just, man, hard to get in as much climbing as you want to unless you live, in Font or something like that.
No, 100%, man. No, to each his own. Like, do you what makes you happy, you do it. And if I could, it would be, as a person that makes plastic, I say this gladly, I would 100% climb outside all the time if I had the option. I just like being outdoors. It's what makes me happy.
Well, I like climbing on boards too. And I just like this completely different ends of the spectrum that we're talking about now, which is only climb outdoors, or boards, which to me just represent the absolute craziest side of us, of just hard, sometimes single moves in a freaking basement on a low wall, steep, just heinous. And to me, I like that, that juxtaposition I always have, where if I'm going to be indoors, in some ways, I like it to be really brutal, really hard with your buddies, just like, banging your head against plastic and plywood. And so, Dan, you came out with the Decoy board in 2020, I want to say, so that's post 2019 moon board, but clearly the 2024 moon board hadn't come out. I think it's pre TB2 as well.
Yep.
Yes. Tell me about just like that genesis of how that came to be.
Well, like similar to you, I guess I want to back up to my last comment about climbing out on rock all the time. I mean, similar to what you're saying, like if I had to kind of rate things to like what I prefer the most, it's like rock, then boards and people's home walls, and then the gym, and all are great. But if I had to put them in order, I'd put them in that order. And I feel like for most of my early days of climbing, and still to this day, most of the plastic climbing I've done on a board, like even the Prime Climb gym I mentioned, like our bouldering wall there, I mean, it was just a board, it was a 45-degree panel that was just littered with holes and tape, 12 feet wide, whatever it was, just tiny. And we just sessioned that thing religiously. So between that, like a couple of Phil Shaw's home walls, I used to go up and climb on Jeff Squire, who's the father of, Brian and Colin.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Jeff used to drag me up trad routes in the gunks, and he had a home wall, one of the earlier home walls. So Phil and I used to drive up and climb with him. But that type of thing for me was always like, there was rock climbing, and there was that, and so I've always been super interested in boards, and, I climbed a good bit on the moon board. In fact, probably climbed on, I would think, one of the earliest moon boards to ever be in the United States. It was like what Scott Fry had in the bay at Kalen and Alex's place. It was just the yellow holds, I believe, which I remember it moved from 40, and then we moved it to West Oakland and ended up at 45. And some of the problems just it was like the first experience I think I had with like adjustability, even in a roundabout way, where it's like, with the 7C that was just nails hard before, now is like impossible with the 5-degree difference. But sorry, a bit of a tangent, but
I love that tangent. Good call out, Scott Fry, absolute
Scott
legend
Fry,
from the Bay.
Legend.
Yeah.
Like, so, and I want to say that has to be one of the earliest moon boards in the United States. I mean, it's before it was even a thing. It was just like you had the little printout, and it was like, I think just the yellow holds.
Dude, I'm going to totally interrupt you because I think that is something that is really interesting, where Scott Fry, absolute legend and cutting edge sport climber of the day. And it doesn't surprise me that he was on the edge of technology, buying something like a moon board when it first came out. And I always have this belief that exceptional people do things differently. Like, it's not like he just did what everyone else did and then was suddenly special. Like, I'm not saying that means that what you need to do is go out and buy the old moon board. It's, you always want to be on the edge trying new things if you want to do something really cool. I just got to hand it to Scott Fry, who I grew up in the Bay Area at that time and always looked up to him because he did all the hard FAs. I mean, he's the man. So yeah, sorry, just couldn't help it.
No. Hey, shout out, Scott Fry, shout out, always welcomed. But yeah, so I mean, so board climbing on that level, I've just always been something I've been super stoked about and into, and a large part of climbing for me and training and so on. But really, when the Decoy Board came to be, I was living in my van and in my shop here in Meriden, Connecticut, which I didn't have any heat. And so I would leave every winter and go out west. I was on the road that winter, the winter 2019 into 2020. It's also when COVID hit. So there I was. Yeah, that whole thing. So there I was in my van, just kind of like, all of a sudden you go in the grocery store, it's like shelves are empty. It was chaos. We all saw it. It was just like, what the hell's going to happen? This is nuts. I don't know where to go. Like anyhow, I ended up luckily being taken in by one of my really good friends, Neil and Jordan, who were old friends of mine from Connecticut, who moved out to New Mexico for work or in school. They took me in. I was able to like crash on their couch during this period of time where everybody was just kind of like, what the fuck? Like, it's the end of the world with what's happening. And Neil's an engineer and a climber and had a 2016 moonboard out in his backyard that we'd climb on. And, I was there kind of stranded on the couch, just trying to keep busy. And Neil had a 3D printer. I had ZBrush, the 3D modeling program that I had been working in. And we were like, bored. What else is COVID? No one's really working. The world's kind of on pause. They're like, well, what do we do? Like, I don't know. Let's try and model and 3D print some holds and just see if we can come up with some kind of process. And we did. And we went through it and we were 3D printing and molding and pouring some little sets right there out in his shed and put some of them onto his wall. And anyhow, through that process of just sort of playing with that process, playing with the 3D modeling, I saw sort of the strength of, the digital shaping with mirroring and sort of being able to tweak the degree of different holds and difficulties and having that really fine-tuned tolerance to kind of to play with the shapes is what then sort of led to, it's like, well, like maybe we can make a board, like that could be cool. And in the beginning, my motivation was to make an 8x10, just really nails hard little thing that like somebody like in Austin would have in their basement, that they just wanted to rage on. And that's all I really cared about. I was like, I'm just going to make this gnarly little board. And I did. Like, that's what the first board was. I think it's still, in some ways, was the best iteration. I had that up in my shop in Meriden for a while. But then as more people climbed on it, more people, shared what their thoughts were and was always like, hey, man, like, you shouldn't pigeonhole yourself into like this smaller thing. You should probably try to make something that's like a little bit more sellable on a commercial level and so on and so forth. And so I kind of like, it's like, yeah, maybe I should, and started to move from that smaller little 8x10 thing into more of, the 8x12 layout with all the different holds and all that. So that's kind of how it evolved and where it came from.
So how did you think about these different shapes and sets for the board when you know that they're not going to be changed? It's different when you're like, oh, I want to reflect Castle Rock, and then these are these cool holds and they can be, put up for one set, changed to a different area or taken down. When you set a standardized board, I mean, that's it. There it is. And just how did that inform the shapes that you made for it?
Well, from the beginning, and it evolved a bit, but I did I thought I was looking at like the few boards that were out there, and I thought one thing that I could do that would be different was sort of take from Decoy's existing sort of style and hold catalog as it was, like the rollies and the schist. So that was kind of the initial idea, was like, why don't I just take what's already sort of working for me, what people seem to already be familiar with, and try to bring that into this more, commercial standardized board. And so that's sort of is where it sort of started. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to have some rollies, and I'm going to have some schist. And then the other shape styles sort of evolved as I was kind of playing with the medium, the 3D modeling a bit more as well. But I think it was largely that at first was like, let me bring in some of the ideas from some stuff that I already have that I feel like is already kind of working, and see if I can make that work on the board.
And how did you then do the layout for it? Because that's another one that I've been involved with setting up spray walls. And I got to tell you, I find it extremely difficult. Like some people think it's easy, but they must have never tried it then.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of hours I sat under that thing. So again, during this phase, I'm living in my workshop in Meriden. So it's like, I think back, it was sort of an exhausting period, but also a really good one in the way that like I was just at work 24/7. So I was kind of like in front of that board, always like moving stuff, tweaking stuff. And I was really lucky at the time too. I've had some really supportive friends like, Bryce Viola lives in the area and sets in the area. He was coming by a bunch. Sam Gardner and Paul John, they were coming up from New York City. Austin was making some trips over, was getting this feedback, getting people climbing on it, getting the feedback from my peers and other setters who played a huge role in helping me sort of like lay the thing out in terms of the whole positioning and things like that.
Yeah, something Bryce mentioned that he felt like because of the holds and where they are, that he almost felt like it's like there's natural lines that just appear rather than him like forcing things. It's like, oh, this hold should connect to this hold. And just thought that was interesting, that idea of, uncovering something or it's already there and you kind of see it pop out versus kind of forcing something, which is, it's hard to explain it exactly unless you've set before and understand the difference there.
Sure. Yeah. And that was something that was definitely thought about and part of like, why I wanted to go with multiple color sets, because I was thinking about that and having the setting background and thinking about what you just touched upon. But like, I think like, you're working in constraints, right? I think sometimes when you're working in constraints, like you end up with like just cooler results. And I think I really like that when I'm climbing on a spray wall, and why like the spray walls I've been setting recently are more color coded, more curated, because I think it's really cool when the colors sort of form a line, or like it automatically, these things start to set themselves. Or it's like, I want to follow like on the Decoy board, like just all rolly line. And it's really cool. Like what I've loved to see is like, there's not that many rollies on the board, but there's so many different pure rolly lines, like different people's abilities and ways they use them and the combinations that people come up with, I think is a cool layer. And I think it's really interesting to see that. It's really fun for me to see.
It's funny because like you can give boards crap that do a lot of tracking, like whether it's the spray walls or standardized boards, like, tracking being that you don't really use a lot of feet. You just you put your feet where your hands were. But if you just, very judiciously use feet and allow for tracking, sometimes you come up with movements that just, you could have never imagined, but then you have to make it work. Again, constraints. Actually, you know what that makes me realize I wanted to ask you was, you have this background in MFA, a Master of Fine Arts, and just how does the teachings or your learnings about the world of art inform, route setting, hold making, climbing? And you can see why I related it to there, because sometimes constraints lead to beautiful art. But is there anything other than than that one that you can connect your degree to?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot, but the ones that come to mind would be sort of, if it works small, it will work large. I use that a lot when I'm shaping, when I'm coming up with a new idea for a new line. Like I'm not going to usually start with like the biggest, most massive shape in the line. I'm usually starting down at like the micro level, at the jib size, and like playing with the textures, playing with some ideas for the shapes. And then from there, I'm taking that same type of shape and blowing it up, but trying to keep similar properties as it expands in size and as the line evolves. So I think it's very similar to like when you're doing a thumbnail sketch to a finished painting. It's starting small. If it's working small, if it's looking good small, it'll work large on a bigger scale.
I like that. I also think of the term fractal when you say that, this idea that especially like in nature, at every level of looking at, say, like granite, like on the microscope, it kind of looks like it does when you look at El Cap. And it's funny because if you're in the valley and you like look at these features like El Cap or the lines in there, and you see like a dihedral or a ret, and then if you look at the boulders, you're like, oh, it looks just like that, small. And then if you look at the holds, you're like, oh, that's why that's a pinch. Like it's like a mini arret or something. And I just think it's like cool how You said really, if it works small, it'll work big. Is that how you said it? How you phrased it? Nice.
Yeah. And that comes to mind. And then I guess in setting and in shaping, at least the painting that I like or the art that I like usually has like a focal point, a focus, somewhere like you want to direct the climber or the viewer's attention. And I think that applies to like shaping when it's like more the artistic, like sculptural stuff where it's like, don't really necessarily want to just have this shape just littered in all this high frequency detail. It's usually like, I really want to like focus in on this pock mark that I think is really cool that like goes out to some cracks and kind of fades, and leaves. And similar like to, routes, the way I like to try to set routes, like, and there's a crux or like, a build up to this moment, kind of similar.
That's beautiful, dude. I love that. I really do.
Thanks, man.
Any other ones? I feel I'm going to be impressed if you have another one because those were bangers. Those are amazing.
No, I don't. Oh man. I mean, cliche, just keep an open mind, man. Be experimental, be curious. Like, even if you have a formula that's working and you're having success with that formula, don't just keep hammering that one formula, right? Like, don't just be like, this works for me. I've had success because I'm good at painting dogs, or like I'm good at setting toe hooks or whatever, or like I'm good at shaving crimps. Don't do that to yourself,
Well, I'm going to link that back to something we were talking about earlier around technology and how things change. And I should have asked you this on holds, and now we're kind of talking about boards, but I'll link them both. What do you think the future of holds are, and what do you think the future of boards are?
There's a lot there. But yeah, I think going back to, I know we talked a bit about manufacturing and the different materials, and we went as far as fiberglass. I think from fiberglass, the definite jumping off point would then be the VTF macros, because that's been something that's like we've seen a lot more of in the last couple of years. Even in terms of hold manufacturing, I think that is definitely the direction things are going in. Like, I don't think any one particular thing is going to necessarily overtake everything, but I do think like VTF, from the manufacturing standpoint, it's just like a good bit easier to produce them, because VTF is like a vacuum thermoformed, where it's, you have some sort of shape that's CNC'd or 3D printed that goes on a vacuum forming table, hot plastics dropped on that, pulled with a vacuum to sort of make the shape, and then textures added to that, similar to the fiberglass process. Cool thing about that is like, it's not nearly as nasty for people to work with. Like fiberglass, the resins and stuff are really toxic. So the VTF kind of eliminates a lot of that, which is great as far as people in the workplace, which I think is cool, things we need to think about. On top of that, a lot of it is an ABS plastic, which is like a thermoplastic, which, because of it being a thermoplastic, it's actually recyclable.
Awesome. Finally.
Yeah, well, so that sort of gets thrown out the window in a lot of cases, because then it's layered with paint and sand, and then there's washers inserted and things like that. So, but the interesting thing there is, like, I've been working on some new shapes with some guys in France that go by Gold. They have technology, a machine that will actually take these VTF shapes, grind it up, and it separates the materials so they can actually reuse the plastic 100%, I believe up to 10 times without loss of properties. So we are finally seeing evolution headed in that direction. Of course, there's still pushback. I mean, I've talked to a number of people who are like, the common recycling argument where it's like, well, the energy it takes to do that process is just as bad as just extracting more raw material. And I'm not a material scientist. I'm not a life cycle analysis person, but I'm like, I trust the guys that I've been working with in France. Like, they're super smart. They're super innovative. And, they're just simply like, kind of like, well, no, like, just being able to reuse this material is just better than extracting more raw material. It just is, like, and I believe that, and I have faith in it. And even if it has kinks to be worked out, even if it's not perfect, at some point, like, we have to make this effort.
Yeah, I've heard those arguments too, and I'm not a material scientist, and so I'm not going to opine on that. But what I would also point out is just they're only going to get better at recycling it too. So like, and then I guess you could argue they'll get better at pulling stuff out of the ground. But like, just gotta imagine that if you could press a button and like just somehow transmute like one shape into another, if you take things to the extreme and like that's where we're headed, right? Like, and so better to just recycle those holes, I think.
Yeah, especially like in like their factory where it's like it's probably completely solar powered, so it's like a lot of the power to like go through this process is and on top of that all, what I think is really cool about what those guys are doing in particular is the product's just good. Like the durability is good, the aesthetics of it are perfect, the paint finishes, everything. It's as good as any other product, but there's also this step in this other direction. So it's like for me, I'm like, it just seems like a no-brainer. I'm like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I work with them?
So it sounds like I can see in my head, I've seen a video of how it's VTF. Is that correct? It's like mold goes into a platform, or I don't know if mold is the right word, like the master shape, and then plastic just comes down and gets sucked onto there. And that sounds like there's some other finishing steps. So what does that allow or change for holds, or is it just that they are ABS plastic, recyclable, maybe cheaper, maybe lighter, but is there anything else that it allows?
Yeah, like they don't chip and crack like fiberglass does. Like if you look at a lot of fiberglass holds around the set screw areas, like they just get nuked, like they start deteriorating. Like the VTF, to my knowledge, I mean, it's still relatively new, so like let's see, but it's been a number of years now. They just hold up better in that way. I'm also working with Alex Waterhouse in Colorado of Absolute Holds. He's doing an amazing job doing VTF stuff. And he's also doing a lot of like what we just call like the plastic dual. And like the color of the hold is the color of the plastic. So like there's no paint to chip off. There's no paint. It's just like it is the material then with texture added to it. So it's again like there's less paint, there's less crap, there's less waste.
I also got to point out that thing that you said about it doesn't chip or crack. I think people might hear that and think like, yeah, that's good, but whatever, who cares? But what that does is it actually opens up other shapes that were so prone to chipping or cracking that they could not be created previously. And now all of a sudden because of that new material, you can see, I mean, we talked about earlier that like big, long, tapered thinness, things like that become more possible where before, yeah, it was just not worth the risk like that. You might get to use it once someone over tightens and it just shatters and you're like, oh, bummer.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then, I mean, I guess with fiberglass, this is an option, but I've seen it more. It seems like the people that are producing the VTF stuff, whether it's Alex or the guys in France or whoever, like they seem to be really 3D savvy. So I can just send them digital files. Like, hey guys, here's some shapes. I don't have to buy this big chunk of foam. I don't have to be stuck in a mask. I don't end up with all this extra waste. It's just like, I don't have to ship like a big crate of all these giant foam shapes that, well, it's wasteful that way. They might get damaged. It's just like, hey, Alex, here's 6 new shapes. Like, what do you think?
Okay, here's my dream for the future, because we're talking about the future, and here's my just pie in the sky wish based on recyclable plastics. If you're at a gym, you could just take whatever, like you strip a wall, you toss all your holds into a big bucket. It reduces it back to raw materials, and then you can just press a button and you can just get the latest decoy shapes just stamped out right there. And you're like, oh, this time I want them in orange. And you just go, it goes, some little cool sound goes on and you get like, Dan's latest decoy set in orange. And then you don't have to ship. Like, I bet you that's not impossible in the long, maybe it's 50 years out, but wouldn't that be cool?
It would be cool. I hope to see the day, man.
All right. I'm sorry. I couldn't help it.
No, I appreciate it. Like, if we think about like late 80s, mid 80s, all the stuff we talked about earlier, polyester resin and clay, blah, 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 up to now, like what's happened. And we know how things seem like these days. The development of things just seems to be like that much exponentially faster. So it's like in 50 years, like who knows, like I hope to live that long to see,
don't be pouring any more holes, because I know that stuff, that's the thing they don't talk about, is that stuff is all gnarly. Thank God there are companies that are doing it in a safe manner so that you don't have to wear those giant masks and act like they're really protecting you, because they're probably still not. So sorry.
Oh man, no, you're right. I mean, that's a whole different. Even I have a full hood mask that I wear, but when I'm shaping, wearing that, for 8 hours, the weight of it on your neck, it's. I'd much rather just be at home. Um, like as much, I shouldn't say much rather. Like I always love sort of that hands-on, like working with the foam. I don't want to ever see that completely gone, but I do like, again, the mix. It's not one or the other. It's like I like to do a bit of both. And as far as the future of shaping, I could see like hand carving something to some degree, scanning that in to a computer, taking it in a computer, making some tweaks there, and then sending that off to get made in VTF, and like different combos like that, or like scanning an actual rock shape, getting someone to CNC that rock shape, and then me taking that by hand and like kind of fine tuning it and then making that into the shape. I think there's a lot of room to grow there still, to like sort of combine the traditional and digital technologies. I don't think anyone's done too much of that yet. So I think that's like really wide open as far as like the future of like hold shaping goes.
Well, that's why you could say the art of hold shaping, but then there's a manufacturing component. And so if you can marry those, that's cool. Bring the human element. Still got to have that. But when you use that latest technology to make things that you couldn't otherwise, or have them optimized for weight to, save on shipping or save on setters' backs, all really cool. Anything about the future of boards that you have envisioned?
Yeah. So I think like what I call like dots boards, just being like the dots layout, the 4x4 standard grid. I don't see that going away. I see the ones here staying, but I see moving away from that to like more of a true spray kind of grid layout, or no gridded layout at all. I think more just like a template. I mean, I guess Moon's already announced something. I haven't seen any images of it, but so it's already moving in that direction. I know other people have been talking about it. I've been working on something here. But yeah, I think more just like a true macro style spray walls that are standardized, that can be lit up and are just like, I don't know, like, jibbing on top of macros obviously would be ideal. Like there's going to be technological things to be figured out there. But I think to me, it's just the logical progressions. Like I think more dots boards, and like there's only so much you can do within that little square that's going to be that much different than the next one. And so I think that moving towards these standardized spray walls, I think makes sense. And I think what we're going to see too is like much more curated spray walls. Like I feel like spray walls in the past, it's always like this skittled colored thing with kind of like just random assortment of holds. I think people are going to start really, just like the standardized walls, really kind of curating, really designing what goes on to those, like the hold selections, the styles, the colors, the layout. I think it's not going to just always be sort of like the way they've been, where they're just, I feel like a lot of times spray walls in a lot of gyms are like sometimes an afterthought, where it's like, well, we've got these holds, like, I shouldn't say afterthought, like, you know what I mean?
No, it is. It totally is.
It's like, we have these holds, let's put them up for a spray wall. No one wants to use it. It's like, well, yeah, because like, it's just not a good wall. So I think moving towards that, along with modular sets, I think that you can maybe, and this will be obviously technically difficult to pull off, but I think like where you could kind of plug and play sets, like let's say like you climb V7, your partner climbs V3, and like you want to have this more interchangeable sets. I think we're going to see that become a possibility on these types of walls. I think along with that, I don't know if we'll see this. Something I would like to see is these types of walls, true spray walls that can be lit up, that have very definite themes, like, like the sort of sandstone-esque overlaid with nice, where it's very much like an actual crag. You know, like your lines are like what Bryce was saying about like on the Decoy board. Like you walk up to this thing and you see it and you're like, well, there's just lines, just like a boulder would be. And yes, like people push back when I bring this up, like, well, there's only going to be so many boulders. I'm like, yeah, but if there's 2,000 really dope boulders that like really utilize these cool features, who cares? Like, it's cooler than like 10,000 where like half of them, like no one wants to climb anyways or whatever, you know, like I think that's still a positive. And I think it would be really cool. In fact, also for me looking into the future, I'm looking at like gyms and like what's going to happen with gyms. And like clearly the big mega gyms as they grow and they acquire other gyms, like I think that's here to stay. And I think that's cool. Like those offer a whole bunch of amenities and positives in different ways that I think are great and will continue to evolve in that direction. But along with that, I think we'll see more board related gyms as we are, like, you know, Boardworks, the Lab, Burley Block, like there's a bunch of them popping up more and more. I know a few more that are slated to open this year. I think that's amazing. I think like the standard dots boards though, as the only thing that they feature is a bit limiting to, it's like you're only going to get a certain kind of climber and crowd that's going to want to come there for that. That's going to make it difficult to sustain business in the long term, depending where you are, right? Like if you're in Boulder, maybe if you're in the Bay, if you're in certain spots, you might be fine. There might just be enough like people that just want to come in and rage on a 45-degree moonboard. But I think in most places, and a lot of other places, for these types of smaller scale gyms to prosper, I think these types of other curated spray walls that have these other kind of features, have these aesthetic vibes, have this visual appeal that when you walk into the space, it's like, whoa, like what is that? It's not just these little dots on a wall. It's like they're crags. And I think this is what I kind of want to see. This is what I hope can be in the future. I think that will be what helps the smaller gyms be more successful, because it'll just allow more accessibility. It'll be more interesting. It'll add another layer versus just like, here's your 4 standard boards or whatever. So
that was really interesting, Dan. One of the things that really jumped out at me there is that idea of making those smaller gyms have some kind of feature that's really attractive. Like, you know, if you come over to my garage and we're just going to like hardcore session on a home wall or a decoy board or whatever it is, like that's because we're hardcore, man. Like, I don't know, like we'll climb on anything. And when we're with our crew, like great. But, I think about the first time I walked into the Rocknasium, which is like, you know, a little gym in Davis. And I'm just, you know, I'm 10 years old or 8 years old. And they had an arch, like a lead arch. And dude, the thing is probably like 20 feet tall, but I mean, I still remember it. And I just like thought of it as a quote unquote real climbing, was like going upside down. And I got handed to gyms that you walk in and they have this big aesthetic feature that just, I'm like holding my hands in my heart right now, 'cause you just feel it. Like, and so, you know, board gyms, if they're going to attract customers, that aren't just like you and me, they need to recognize there has to be some visceral draw that's not just, oh, I'm already like a diehard and I'll climb on anything and I love these boards. So I thought good insight there.
yeah, and like you kind of nailed it too, where it's like you got to think about like amenities wise, right? Like everybody likes the idea of the small spot, but like if the big gym down the road also has those same boards that you have, and they have the big arch and they have a sauna and they have whatever they have.
I knew you were going to say sauna. Everyone says sauna. It's always sauna. They got a sauna, dude.
I want a sauna. That's probably why. But you know what I mean? Like at some point, it's kind of like you got to offer something a little different. It's just like, I don't know, a restaurant experience or something. Like if you're going to make it with a little food truck or the little like smaller niche type of thing, it's got to have some real flavor. It's got to have something different. Again, all just my opinions. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong on all of them, or maybe they just won't happen. I hope to see some of it. It's kind of what I'm trying to push for the little gym that's going to be here in the Berkshires. We're going to try to do. We don't have a lot of space, so there'll only be one adjustable wall. But what we hope to do is like a rotating spray that's like, yeah, it's this layout for 6 months or whatever, but and maybe we'll template it out or photograph it so we can bring it back if we want. But we'll probably try to keep it moving and do experiment with different holds and different ideas on that wall. And again, people might hate it. I just did what I called like this decoy spray wall experiment. I have like a whole fleet of holds that I go and install at local gyms. So I did one up at Burley Block in Vermont. I did one at BC's in New Paltz, one at Ascent here in New Haven. And part of that was just to see what's the response. Like, I think this thing's cool, but if I put this up in these spaces, are people going to use it? Or they just, I'm like, I don't know. I'm nearing 50. I realize I'm like, maybe what I think is cool is not at all what the younger crowd thinks is cool or whatever. Like, let's find out. And so I've been installing those and the feedback's been really good. It's been interesting to see people have really embraced it. It seems to have gone really well and people seem really stoked. So I'm hopeful.
You got to try new things to find out. I'm a big fan of iteration. You see what happens. And then, that's why we can't predict the future. Is like you try something and then you go, wow, that sounded really good. Wasn't so good, but this one little part of it was kind of cool. Let's try a little something more on that line. So
for sure.
Okay, Dan, last question for you. It's my classic one. And that's, how do you go from good to great?
Okay. I think your last comment leads into kind of what I have to share for
awesome.
that.
Awesome.
And on some level. Yeah. I mean, I want to say, just when I first saw that this was a thing, I kind of initially thought, like, how does that pertain to like art and shaping? But then I'm like, well, it's a climbing podcast, so it should encompass that. But I guess what I would say is that, like, no matter how far down a particular path you've gone or how invested you are into some particular work of art or climbing project, that you shouldn't be afraid to go back to the drawing board and sort of start over. Like, don't have that fear to do that. I feel like we often do, and people often just get so mesmerized by like just breaking through to this next and climbing the next number that they sort of get stuck in that mode and now are like only sort of like in project mode 24/7 all year long. And I think that can be more of a hindrance than it can be a positive for your progression. So I don't think it's a bad thing to maybe just like, if you find yourself sort of like knocking your head against something and not feeling like you're getting somewhere, to just be able to like, yeah, back off, start over, take it back to the drawing board.
Yeah, what's called the sunk cost fallacy too, right? Like, yes, I put 10 years into it, but if it's not working, the best time to quit is now. Although, okay, just to push you harder on this and make it more nuanced, is when things are hard, it doesn't mean they're bad. Like, you got to train for a long time, or to do your hardest project, you're not going to do it in a day. Otherwise, clearly it's not your hardest project. And so it's kind of like this question: how do you know when you're in a dip, oh, this is just a hard period, versus a cul-de-sac where it's like, this is a dead end. I could bang my head against this. And I know there's no perfect answer, but I'm going to push it, Dan.
Yeah, no, I have a bunch of thoughts here. At the end of the day, like, I guess I should also add, like, if you're going, it's a tricky thing, because like, if you're going to make it through to the next level, at some point you have to just sort of punch the clock and put in that work and sort of knock your head against things. I would say, at the point where you're just not enjoying it anymore, like if you're kind of miserable in the process, then that's an easy point to be like, okay, time to take a step back, start over. But I would say also at any point, like once you hit that period where you feel like you're just kind of like not making any real momentum, not making any real progress, yeah, at that point, it's just fine. Like, don't be afraid. Like, I've seen it. So like, I saw it with like Bryce recently on the King Condor thing that he did. Like, he was so close to doing this like one knee bar method. And I think he's like so many days deep and like so close. And I remember being there when he unlocked this other sequence. And it's like, oh man, like it saw the possibility. And it was like, I don't know, should I even bother? And it was like, yeah, like why not? And I think he ended up doing it that other way, even after all the years of like these other sequences. So at first I thought about how that comment would relate to art. Like in shaping, I think it greatly does in that. I find that like in shaping, when I'm down in the weeds and like I've spent on like 3-4 days, particularly on the more sculptural stuff, what I've done a number of times, I've been like 3-4 days deep. Like, why can I not get this thing to work? Why can I not get it right? And then like, I've legitimately just taken my handsaw and just like chopped the thing in half and like thrown it at the wall. And then what the results of that ends up being like, oh, like there it is, you know, like I wasn't afraid to just be like, yeah, I put 4 days into this thing. Who cares? Whatever, you know, like it doesn't matter.
Oh, that's really good. I think what's funny is that when we go down some rabbit hole and it ends up not working, there's a way that we think that it was a waste. But just like when I made you tell your whole origin story in some, you know, clean package to then show how you're now, you know, a great hold shaper and everything's great. It makes it sound linear, but things are weird and they go really bad and go really good and go really bad. And so when you go down some rabbit hole, like the knee bar thing or shaping for 4 days and then cutting it in half, you can argue that it's a waste, but it's like, it's not. It's actually crucial to get to where you're going now. And that's really hard to recognize until you have hindsight and you're like way in the future, like, oh, it was all meant to be. See, like I meant to cut it in half, even though you didn't, you were frustrated. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's being able to hopefully, step back and be able to enjoy sort of that journey, that process, all those things that help you get to that end result and be able to recognize all those steps and to kind of try to find enjoyment in those. Cause I think if you can, then, you know, I mean, again, like back to like, I think about this a lot with like people that I think are like some friends of mine that are like serial projectors. And it's like, it's just project 24/7. And I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, I can't, I'm like, are you still having fun? And, you know, I think it just sometimes you lose sight, get in that mode and lose sight of all those other little things that you can do along the way that you actually enjoy and that actually help you get to the point you want to be. I think that's just important to try and be able to like take a step back, not be afraid to just start over. And even if it's from scratch or just give up altogether.
Good stuff. Yeah. Don't get stuck in the sunk cost fallacy, really. And you can always reinvent yourself no matter how young or old. You could just be only climbing trad climbs. And then you decide, no, I'm going to climb on those little boulders at the bottom of the cliff. And here you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, let's go back into the weeds for the Patreon questions, back into the weeds on holds. If you want to hear that Q&A and other extra behind-the-scenes content from this episode and others, head over to patreon.com/testpiece to sign up now. Patrons also get their episodes early and ad-free. There's hours and hours of bonus content there to help you on your own path of going from good to great. Still not sure? There's a free 7-day trial for you to check it out. And to help the show grow, please share this episode with someone who would love it. Okay, see you next week.